on this computer. And just a quick introduction for the recording. Sorry, I'm blowing this now. We are seeing some COVES data in action. We are going to get started with Beth Katz from the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. And I'll turn it over to you, Beth.
All right, I will share my screen. Here we go. So, hi everybody. My name's Beth. I'm over at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. We are actually three locations. One is the Natural History Museum. We also have the La Brea Tarpeian Museum and the smaller William S. Hart Museum. I'll be talking just about NHM today. And we started COVES in July of last year. We're hoping to have a full fiscal year of data, but we got through to March. So in our pre-COVID data collection, we had 938 responses, and that was human beings recruiting. We limited our outdoor spaces, which is our butterfly and spider pavilions and our nature gardens in fall. We reopened again at the beginning of March, and just April 1st, we opened our indoor museum at 25% capacity. So that was exciting. I only have 3 days of data collection from the indoor reopening, but we've had a pretty good response. So lessons learned. I don't think we were too surprised, but people are really happy to be back and out of their houses. We've seen kind of static or increase in our overall ratings and NPS since our pre-COVID days. So from left to right, those data are showing over time. So it's easy when people are happy to see that data and move on. And this may seem obvious, but this time around, we've been paying very close attention to comments. And it's really helped to have that live data feed available to us. My executive staff, I never updated them, regularly with survey comments. But this time I started sharing it with them weekly, and they started paying attention. And we identified some important challenges that we wouldn't have gotten from our, seemingly high ratings. And that had to do with wayfinding, access to visitors with mobility challenges, and our suboptimal ticket reservation system. And one of the key things was because of our new one-way finding, folks were having to do a huge walk around our entire building to get back to the car park. And that was especially challenging for folks with mobility issues. And so we did try to actually act on these feedback and make some changes when we were able to reopen in the spring. Unfortunately, the ticket reservation system is still a little subpar. The other thing we're looking at now, and I don't think we've really made actionable decisions on this yet, but are really important looking at our demographics. By nature of how we reopened, we had certain member days only, and then members had specific times. And so really, we know that members have greater access to the museum right now, and then that influences the demographics of our audience. So in the gray, in our pre-COVID days, we had 23% of survey respondents were members, and now we're up, to 3/4. Same thing, we were pulling in about 31% of first-time visitors, and that has dropped off to next to 0. And that has to do with lack of tourism and other reasons. And the next thing we've learned is Angelinos, as we call ourselves here in LA, want to get their children out of the house. So not surprisingly, due to travel restrictions, our percent of locals only groups has increased a lot. We were already a very local museum, 66%, and that has shot up. The percent of children in groups, this I found really interesting because we were already pretty high at 58%. It went up a little when our outdoor spaces were open, but in that first weekend when indoor was open, the children flooded the museum. And this is a challenge we're going to have to think about because a lot of our spaces geared towards children are closed right now, including our Touchable Discovery Center. So this is something we've started to get feedback on that we're going to have to think critically about. One thing I was really concerned about when we heard about mobility issues was if the percent of folks with disabilities was going to decrease over time if we were no longer going to be accessible. And I was happy to see that that was not the case, that mix has been pretty stable over time. What tends to be the big one around here, we are, a very diverse community in Los Angeles, and we pay really close attention to ethnicity. And generally, pre-COVID, we're about equal folks identifying as white and identifying as Hispanic or Latinx. And when we reopened, that bright green in the fall, white jumped, Hispanic representation dropped. That had a lot to do with access to our members and the demographics of our members, but it stayed pretty heavily for our outdoor reopening. And then I was really pleased to see as this one weekend of indoor reopening, it's starting to stabilize again. We were able to get more Hispanic and Latinx visitors, but it's something that moving forward, we're also thinking really critical about how do we make sure at this limited capacity with a really challenging reservation system where everything sells out in one day, that all members of our community are having access. And I think that's my time, Ryan. So I'm gonna hand it back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Beth, and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Fascinating stuff. Next, I'll be turning it over to Elisa Israel from the St. Louis Science Center. Elisa, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Let me pull up my slides. Hopefully this is the right one. You should be seeing my slide, yes? Okay, so what I'm gonna do is these are slides pulled from a much larger presentation, looking just at our 2020 data, because the thing for us that really came out is, well, how not different 2020 ended up being in a number of points. So, so we were, just a little background about our data, if I can get my thing to advance here. Come on, there we go. So we were closed for 3 months, mid-March to mid-June, but we ended up doing data collection through COVES for pretty much the whole time that we were open in 2020. So we had the regular COVES prior to closure. When COVES resumed its full tool with the modifications for COVID in August, we were doing it then. But shortly, right after we reopened, we actually incorporated a number of the COVES questions, although not all of them, into an exit survey that we were doing in June and early July, so that we could have consistent data all the way across. And for all of these, I should say, we were doing the same methodology, staffed exit surveys, so that we could compare the data. Because of course, we were all expecting, quite a few differences. And so what I did for this presentation is I pulled a few of our demographic patterns and visitation pattern to show, well, 2020 for us really wasn't all that different, interestingly enough. And this became most noticeable when we looked at where people were coming from. So this is all based on zip code data comparison between 2020 and the last couple of years. And when we looked, we were all maybe expecting to see perhaps more locals coming as a portion of our audience. And in fact, what you see here in the various categories is we really didn't have much of a difference in terms of the distribution of who was coming. Obviously, fewer people total number, but when you look at this, you'll see, so we break down our locals into 2 different categories based on whether they live in the Zoo Museum District, which is a taxing district that supports the local museums here. And so we tend to focus a lot on those who live in St. Louis City and County because they are our tax supporters. But you can see that even amongst our tourists, we had pretty much the same distribution as we normally do. And I will say, this isn't just people in driving distance from St. Louis. When I was looking at this on a month-to-month basis and looking at the states represented, I think at one point in the summer, we had over 30 states represented in our zip code data. So really, it was really looked a lot like it normally does. We saw this also with just in terms of who was coming. There was a slight increase in folks visiting in groups that included children, but not dramatically so. We've seen this fluctuate year to year, depending on, you know, what our traveling exhibits are and such. And even while the graph on the right doesn't show earlier years in it, this is also pretty consistent with what we've seen in earlier years, where people coming in adult only groups, the bulk of them are in these younger age ranges. That's a pattern we've seen for some time. Where we did notice a bit of a shift is just looking strictly without regard to group type, just the ages of the adult. In this case, we're looking just the adult respondent, where we did see a little bit of a drop in the portion of folks in the older age ranges. And this was most noticeable when we were looking at the data on a month-to-month basis. And so we had a traveling exhibit in the summer, Da Vinci, that did pull in some adult audiences. But after that exhibit closed, and then with, I think with the rising numbers of cases, I think there is a correlation with seeing the decrease in, like I said, it was more noticeable in the monthly data of fewer portion of our audience in these older age ranges in the fall. I haven't had a chance to really dig deeply into our 2021 data yet to see if that's rebounding. I think it is, because now we have a new traveling exhibition. In terms of members, we had about the same percentage of members coming as we typically do. And for those of you who are looking at this going, gosh, those numbers look really low compared to what I'm used to seeing for my institution, bear in mind, St. Louis Science Center is free general admission. So members become members for reasons other than getting into the museum for free. So as you can see, this portion is pretty typical for what we've seen in recent years. In terms of how often people were coming, where we see more repeat visitors or more first timers, well, even that looked about the same as it normally does. As you can see here, the bulk of our audience had visited at some time in the past, in very consistent numbers with what we'd seen previously. But we did see a little bit of a difference when we look specifically at the repeat visitors. And this is the one thing where we expected to see a change, and we really did. We did see fewer repeat visitation when we looked at how often people reported visiting in the last 12 months. That the mean did go down, although it didn't go down dramatically. And as you can see, even here, there was already a little bit of a downward trend happening. So is this entirely due to COVID? May not be entirely due to COVID, but there is a pattern there. So those are just some of the things. I will say, I will echo Beth's comment that we were looking a lot at the comments as well. But I wanted to focus on the things here that were sort of, like I said, surprising that it wasn't surprising. So thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. I think I'm going to go next with a Museum of Science example. That still is incredible to me how little change you saw in some cases. So just love when you highlight that, because it always blows my mind. So I'm going to share like more of a specific example from the Museum of Science than kind of general trends that we noticed around. In Massachusetts, we're unique, maybe, I think, in having 2 different school vacation weeks in the early part of the calendar year. So we have one school vacation week that happens in February around President's Day, and another one in April that happens around the marathon. Sorry, chats are coming in. Just want to make sure. Okay. So we also had kind of a funky reopening and closing pattern where we closed along with everyone else in March. We reopened in July of 2020. And similar to like what Beth was saying, we were seeing pretty high net promoter scores, overall experience ratings. Maybe people were just really happy to be back. They kind of liked that it wasn't so crowded. And then we closed around the winter, like I forget the exact date, but it was in November, December sometime, when there was that surge happening around the holidays, the winter holidays, and reopened early February, right before our school vacation week. So, and the screen you're seeing, this OKR, this is like a similar to KPIs or key performance indicators. It stands for objectives and key results. And it's just a thing that our museum is now using to kind of set quarterly and yearly goals. So I'll explain more, but you don't have to get too deep into what OKR means. But it kind of helps us track things in an ongoing way, and we incorporate COVES data into these OKRs. So just as an example, one of the objectives that the museum set out for itself was to delight our visitors on site, and as measured by 3 specific things. So we wanted at least 50% of our visitors to rate the museum as outstanding, that top of the scale on the OER. We have a Museum of Science specific rating scale about the museum being up to date, which we're adding a ton of new permanent exhibits right now. So looking for that rating to go up in average would be really, really positive for us. So people rating the museum is up to date. And then at least 90% of visitors saying that the museum has mostly or fully addressed their COVID-19 safety concerns on that 4-point scale question that we use. So those are the things that we're tracking on an ongoing basis. And I'm going to show data from like since July 2020 and then February 2021 when we reopened for the second time. So what we saw, and I apologize if it's a little bit hard to see these graphs, but I'll kind of describe what they say. So since reopening, we were hitting that 90% mark pretty consistently. Our visitors were really feeling like their concerns were addressed. But then in our February data, we saw a 10% drop, like pretty quickly. And from previous years of COVES, we had not seen swings this dramatic. I think it's attributable to having so many data points from the email survey, which we're currently doing. Similar to Beth, we'll be transitioning back to in-person starting in July. But we saw this big drop, and so we're worried that we weren't addressing people's concerns. So we also looked into the open-ended comments and coded some of them. So the biggest reason that was coming through for why people were not feeling that their concerns were addressed was crowding and the difficulty of social distancing. So we were, finally seeing, even though obviously we weren't at full capacity, we were still reduced capacity, it was still feeling too crowded for people. And then somewhat in a bit of a challenging contradiction, people were saying that there needed to be more staff on the floor, enforcing mask policies and cleaning exhibits in between people. So kind of a tension there between too many people on the floor already, and I want more staff out on the floor enforcing stuff. So I'll just move on. We also looked at the outstanding rating, and that also we saw a big drop in our February data that was concerning to us. So from 41% to 28%, comparing, from since we opened in July to just looking at February only. So also looking into the coding for that, since it was an overall experience rating, there still were a lot of positive comments, like 2/3 of people were just giving nice positive comments, but among the more negative comments, crowding again came through really strongly. But interestingly to me, when I was looking at these data, the second most common reason was a reason I kind of called, I couldn't do the things I wanted to do for a variety of reasons. I could not get tickets to anything. We have new exhibits open that we were ticketing to reduce crowds, but people didn't always know that they needed a ticket, apparently. So they would get to the museum hoping to see the new exhibit, and it was sold out. Our cafe is currently closed. There were too many people. We had at the time a big new exhibit that was under construction. So there was a large footprint in our main area that was just kind of walled off, like coming soon. So it was COVID related, but it wasn't COVID safety related necessarily. It was like, I didn't know I needed a ticket to go to the cool new exhibit. So actually what we ended up doing is the up-to-date rating also dropped dramatically. And what I ended up, it's not on the slide here, but we looked into people who had managed to go to the new exhibit versus those who hadn't. And if you did visit one of our, brand shiny new exhibits, the up-to-date average rating was higher, like 10 points higher than if you didn't. So one thing that actually ended up coming out of this was we stopped ticketing for those new exhibits and are just doing kind of a pulsing strategy instead, so that people aren't hit with that surprise of showing up and realizing that they need a ticket and getting frustrated. Obviously, it's still, we can't get everybody in that needs to go in, but we're attempting to make that a little bit less of a frustration, disappointment point for people. And also using these data to prepare for our second school vacation week in April. Probably, yes, planning to put some more staff out on the floor just to explain, the procedures to visitors and make sure everyone understands what's going on. And, probably doing some additional cleaning just to deal with the additional crowds. So I'll stop there. But I hope that was useful for folks.
Great, thank you so much, Alex. Next, we have Julie Goss from the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. Yay for art data.
Yay for art data. Hi all, I am Julie Goss from Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas. I'm the Director of Data Strategy, and I am gonna talk a little bit about our COVES data. So we're the first art museum pilot site and started collecting COVES in January of 2020. Then we stopped in March when we closed and reopened in mid-June. And restarted COVES with on-site data collection and a modified protocol. So we have some data to talk about. And also, since it's the first year to shift to this system, I've been doing a lot of work internally to sort of merge what we were doing before with this system. And now we can look at experience data a little differently. So how can we create new dashboards that merge with our operational data, all that fun stuff. I'm sure many of you have already figured out how to do at your sites. We're just starting to do at mine. So I thought I'd just bring up a screen share of our yearly report that I created. We are a calendar year, fiscal year. So this is a yearly analysis that I would have done typically with our previous study. And now I've transitioned to COVES. So it's a pretty large report, and we have 2 sites, Crystal Bridges, and we opened a satellite site in 2020 in February. So it was sort of the year of change. Everything is different. And if there's a difference, we can blame all sorts of things. New measures, new sites, COVID, all of it, an umbrella of caveats. But this is just our overall report, and I'm not going to go through every single piece. You know, it starts with an introduction about the 2 sites. Similar to Beth, we were seeing those differences in our historical data, and this year, way more local, way more members, younger. Because the momentary is also trying to attract a younger audience, there was also always going to be this question of, is that site getting younger visitors than our Crystal Bridges site? And the answer for this first year was no. The answer was also, but Crystal Bridges got a lot younger, so everybody got younger. And how often can you say that? So we did have some differences over time for Crystal Bridges and between the sites. It starts with an overall introduction. I'm happy to share this report if anyone would find it useful. The experience overall, some quotes, and I compared between the 2 sites. But I wanted to call attention to when I get down into, and then for each site I do experience, the temporary exhibition, and demographics. So the overall experience and ratings. And our temporary exhibitions, I think, is interesting, and maybe for my fellow art museum colleagues who have joined us here today, because, you know, Hank Willis Thomas was open at the beginning of the year, and then it closed, and then we were able to keep it open a little longer after our museum reopened. So that data sort of straddles the COVID experience, and then Ansel Adams was later in the fall, and one thing that our internal stakeholders and things we're looking at here, it's like, yeah, everything's really positive and similar. I think Beth mentioned this too, paying attention to the comments, because this was a question of, okay, everything is really positive, but I wonder, like, why is Hank Willis Thomas so much more outstanding than Ansel Adams? So we were able to look at those comments and show that people were talking about how the Hank Willis Thomas exhibition was just so much more relevant at this moment in time. It does discuss topics like police brutality, systemic racism. It's the perspective of a Black male artist. So people were talking about it being emotionally invoking. And then people with the Ansel Adams exhibition were like, yeah, it's pretty. And that's still a positive experience, but more just talking about the general beauty. And that's interesting for us internally, because as you can imagine, Ansel Adams might be seen as an attendance draw, a blockbuster, but showing the more potentially significant impact, Hank Willis Thomas, which would be a smaller price tag, smaller exhibition. But more maybe to the point of our goals for what we want to do on site. So it was useful to have that open in the data. It's not going to help us, make a change today, but kind of further reinforce changes that we're going to make over time. So just wanted to call attention. And that's about what I was going to share, but happy to share more or this report or answer any questions.
So lucky for you, Julie, Kate already shared it in the chat. So if you were looking for a copy of that report and requested it, since you got a lot of requests, that is right there. And you can absolutely, I encourage you to follow up with both Julie and Kate Mader, who are on this call, once you get to the breakout group option. So very next, we have Gretchen from the Science Museum of Minnesota, who's going to be sharing some data from the Twin Cities. Gretchen, the floor is yours. Virtual floor.
All right, so I don't often share screen. Allow. Oh, goodness gracious. It keeps asking me for system preferences when I try to share my screen. So give me a minute. All right. I also just want to acknowledge that things can be a little bit rough here in the Twin Cities. And I'm being, nope, it wants me to quit and reopen Zoom. So Ryan, could I ask
for you?
Yes, or Alex, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, let me just grab your email real quick.
Realize it was going to do that. So I can, how I'm going to be presenting this is a little bit more from a utilization focus. I'll share some of the, I'll be sharing some of the data and the details, but it's really more about how we've been using the data. And I realized I kind of missed on the snappy title. I could have called it the 3D approach, because we'll be looking at our dashboard, some of our demographics, and some deeper dives. And
it's okay to have just the PDF here, Gretchen.
That's fine. There's no animation or anything.
Great.
So just a little bit of context that we, the Science Museum of Minnesota, I'm Gretchen. I'm part of the SMM COVES team, along with Marjorie Biquette, Sarah Robertson, and a number of other people on the R&E evaluation team. And we closed in March of 2020, and then reopened in August, and then closed again in November, and then reopened February 22nd. So there's some data pulled from both of those times. So you can go ahead and go to the next page. So we were super excited to be inviting people back to our museum after a couple of closures. And so on the next slide we're going to talk a little bit about our dashboard and how we have been using that to identify and address essential visitor needs through regular meetings, and basically just really encouraging and reminding people in the organization that they have access to this dashboard. And like others before, we've paid a lot of attention to open-ended comments and how those might relate to ratings of safety and overall experience. And we were able to put out some really simple to read and easy to understand visualizations and reports to the whole museum to say that we've been done a pretty good job of addressing most of the experiences that in the past have contributed to lower ratings, as well as some newer things that are related to COVID. So the visible cleaning, people feel really comfortable around the high touch areas. People really call out in open-ended comments that they appreciate staff interactions, asking people to mask up. The timed admissions actually has contributed to lower crowding, and people are able to feel comfortable in the building, as well as see more of the things that they wanted to see. And one of the really important things is that despite maybe more limited opportunities on the floor, people rate the value of experience for the cost similarly to pre-COVID times. So we're still delivering a very valuable experience. And there are a couple of things that were identifiable that are that staff stay on top of continuously, such as asking people to mask up, being aware of concerns around social distancing, specifically in the Omni Theater. And there were some folks who called out some missed experiences, so ways that can be accommodated. And then the one thing that we really need to pay a lot of attention to is our cafe ratings have always been a little on the lower side, but the comments post-opening have really kind of directed us to this, that people are, they're not exactly happy with some of the policies around food and beverage consumption in the museum. So that's something that we continue to pay attention to, and I believe there's a new food endeavor coming soon, so that's being worked on. And we can move to the next page. So that first one is sort of like a weekly addressing emergent concerns. We were able to pull all of our demographic data from the first open period between September and November to be able to have a look at how our demographics have been changing. And much like other sites, we've seen increases in membership or members, more local participants, and there's also some demographic changes in racial identity and economics, that we saw a larger proportion of people selecting white as a racial identity, and more, higher levels of education and higher levels of income coming through the door. Our groups with children and disability status seem to be about the same. Next slide, please. And this is something that we've just started with our reopening in February, is utilizing our COVES data to help us get a better understanding of visitor motivation and behaviors around unified content campaigns. We have the museum has done a content campaign focused on equity that's called The Science is All of Us. And it's a series of exhibits and programs, both online and offline and in person, that focus on the social, historical, and scientific roots of racism and race in the United States. And we were able to use our COVES data to get a sense of how frequently people are visiting the on-site elements, and to what degree that might be a motivator for their visit in the first place. So we were, out of 195 surveys from our second reopening period during that theme, 74% went to the exhibit, and most people tended to cite social reasons, like I want to spend time with my family, I want to get out of the house, something to fun to do with my kids, as their primary motivator for visiting. But the Science is All of Us equity theme experiences kind of came out on top of the specific exhibit or show that they came to see. So it works out to about 5% of our visitors planned to come to the museum to see one of these experiences, or have one of these experiences. And that is all that I have on these two slides. Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate you driving for me.
Bet.
Thank you, Gretchen, and thank you, Alex. And so for the final presentation today, I'm actually going to share on behalf of the Connecticut Science Center, and I know Patty and Tyler are both here, so they're going to chime in. But for the purposes of illustrating some of the data and some of the questions that have actually come up even in the chat, we'll be looking at Connecticut Science Center's reopening data. They've been collecting steadily since their reopening in August. You can see the overall sample size is over 500. They are the only COVES site right now that is jointly doing email and on-site random sampling. So their old method and their new method using the same COVES instrument. So two different distribution methods. The email distribution has slightly more responses, 307, which is 60%, just over 60% of their sample. Their on-site random sampling sample size, however, is close to 200, which is great considering changes to visitor turnout, staffing issues, everything else. In their overall sample, 41% are members, and you can see that slightly higher in the email sample than the on-site staffed sample. And similar to some of the presentations we just saw, there are a lot of local attendees, right? Connecticut residents and Massachusetts residents. So Patty or Tyler, do you want to jump in quickly and provide any additional context around data collection or the experience at Connecticut Science Center?
Yeah, absolutely. And Tyler is on the call, and also Katie Leamy, who is our data manager. And so please, everybody, hop in if you have things that you want to add. We reopened June 20th, and we did not shut down again. So we've stayed open since June 20th. And we are seeing initially through most of 2020, we saw a really big increase in our member visitation. So it represented more like 50% of our visitors on a daily basis. And even though we were at 50% capacity, we're actually, you know, nowhere near that, maybe about 20% of what we normally would get. We're significantly better now. But what is interesting is we were running into reluctance of on-site sampling. For the staff was a little bit reluctant, to be perfectly honest, and then the visitors were a little bit reluctant to take a tablet from us. So we ran into kind of both, working both ends of that. And we have found that with email, people are a lot harsher on us. But also, sometimes they're not even the person that came on site. So we are definitely finding some issues with our data based on these two kind of collection options right now. I don't know if you've seen that anywhere else, Ryan, but that is something that we're noticing.
Great, well, that's really helpful and actually provides a great segue to the next set of slides, which just unpacks this email versus on-site data collection piece a bit more. So obviously I don't have access to some of the response rate data that Patty does, at least for explaining some of these differences, but we're primarily just looking at overall ratings to get a sense of what's happening with the method changes. So here you can see the OER overall experience ratings, 41% outstanding, 39% excellent, and then 20% less than excellent, with a net promoter score overall for this entire sample of 64. But what we're really interested in looking at is the one site, two methods approach. So if the experience is fundamentally the same across both samples, but we understand there is some amount of bias in the sample, as Patty just introduced, how much is that impacting what we see in the data here? So the top line is one method, the bottom line is another method. You can see for the top, we have 47% outstanding ratings, excuse me, and a net promoter score of 78, with the other method roughly 10 points lower in the OER outstanding rating and a drop in NPS of around 23. So based on that, which one do you think is which method? Patty knows the answer. Tyler knows the answer. I think everyone knows the answer now, which Patty alluded to. The email method is showing some really harsh critics of the experience. And this is a little bit counterintuitive from some of the previous data that we've drawn on or piloted, but perhaps not too surprising given some of Patty's concerns, given what we know about the sample. And we can break it down a little bit more. And so one of the things I was particularly interested in when looking at these differences was what was the member and non-member difference, right? What's the member effect, essentially? So I put a quote at the bottom. This is not supposed to be definitive. So Patty, thank you again for letting me peruse your data. But the quote at the bottom kind of typifies some of the more negative member comments, which is members have a stark impression and idea of what the visit experience is. And at the moment, it's just not as fun as it once was. And to be honest, I don't think we can debate that, right? Like right now, life is just not as fun as it once was. And if you have a really strong or visceral connection with a place and it's a little bit different or modified, it might just not be the same. And that's okay. And here in the data, we can see that the on-site staffed ratings for both NPS and OER are higher for members. But what I really want to look at is this next slide, which is the non-members. And even though there is a difference between on-site staffed method and email for both OER and OER and NPS, what I'm noticing is that the non-member ratings are really high. The non-member ratings here are much higher than I would expect in non-COVID times. So combining a slightly depressed member effect where they're saying things just aren't quite the same, and a particularly high non-member impression across overall experience and net promoter, we're seeing kind of this reduced gap, but overall deflated ratings. And one of the reasons that's important, if I go back to this first slide, is the distribution of members across both the email and the on-site. There are more members in that email sample. So that's another reason why the email looks particularly harsh when we consider how members are perceiving their visit.
Right. I would like to add, members do, we're not a huge museum. So members do have their favorite exhibits, or their kids have their favorite exhibits. And we have definitely had to take things offline. We have a big imagination playground, blue blocks that we had to take off, roller coasters, Legos, any Bernoulli blowers. So, we pulled the things that we could off the floor and did replacements of things that, were less interactive or not, so many hands on them, to make them, to replace the space. But as members, I think they're like, hey, that's not available to us and that's not available to us. But I do think that the public that comes in, they've decided to come out for a family experience, right? They've said, I want to take my kids somewhere, or I want to come out and do something. And so they're a little bit more receptive to the experience because they don't have pre-existing expectations of us, I think.
That's great. That's a lot of really helpful information, Patty. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into some breakout groups. Admittedly, those presentations were amazing and therefore took up a little more time than we were hoping, but we've still got about 10 minutes for breakout groups. So I'm going to open them right now. And each presenter will be asked to join a room independently. So you can ask those presenters and those institutions more questions about their data or their findings or their methods or anything like that. And then we'll reconvene in about 7 or 8 minutes and just do a quick share out before the end of the hour.
Hey.
Hey.
Thank you. We all had a minor heart attack. We were supposed to have slides ready.
No, that's why I was trying to email a long time ago and say, like, I would do some of that lifting for you to make sure that we didn't put too much pressure on you to get that done.
If you
the text was flying around, we're like, Tyler.
If you rewatch the recording, you can see Patty call my cell phone to see if any of us prepped anything.
Yeah. Hi, Kenneth.
Hi, Kenneth.
How's everybody doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Good, good.
Good. So yeah, I think this is just an opportunity for us to discuss that last presentation a little bit more.
Well, I guess no one wanted to join our breakout room.
Ken did. Ken was excited. And I saw the question in the chat.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it.
And Ken, I think your first question was just, were there demographic differences between the sample?
Right. If there were any that aside from the, which one was it where there were more members? There were more members in the
email.
In the email. And so were there any other differences in who people were? And is there any difference in, were you collecting visit history too? Like frequency of visit?
Yep.
Yeah. The email version is slightly different because it does ask what day did you visit and who did you visit with. The thing with the email for us is that we send it out a month after the visit, right? So sometimes, when you are on site and you're having a fantastic day, your response is immediate. But when you've driven out of the garage and, 3 weeks later, things are happening, you know, you just look back on it and you might be a little more harsh too. So it is a whole month later, right, Katie? If not, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I send it out, or, you know, I pull the information and then Sean sends it out the first week. So it could be the following week for you if you visited at the end of the month, or it could be a month if you visited at the beginning. So.
Got it.
Yeah.
So with our in-person, obviously we were doing it as people exited, and we do it. So let's see, and we're not doing COVES, but we're doing something similar, and it's and before the pandemic, we would do it quarterly. Since the pandemic, we're surveying, but we do a campaign that identifies the day, but we're sending the survey out at the end of the day or at the beginning of the next morning. So we are getting results by day, but we report by week.
Mhm.
And I can't tell it. And so I'm not seeing a difference in demographics of people before and after, except that, you know, you're not getting people from out of the region and not getting foreign visitors. But for the measures that are common across the board, it's kind of the same. But like you were saying in the comments, people are making statements about how they miss A or B, or I can't go see this, and we wish to, you know.
Here we go. Here's Ryan.
Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that. How can I
Yep.
help? Which rooms do you want to go to, and what can I do?
Yeah. Marcy and Caitlin, yeah, who'd you like to hear from more?
I feel exceedingly flexible right this minute. So wherever you want me to go, and yeah, maybe I just need to update my Zoom. I don't have the little box.
That's all right.
I'm
And
gonna
I'd be
put
happy
you-
to go to Julie's if there's room for the art museum one.
Okay. Julie is room 4. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, I realized, oh shit, Ryan left the main room. I got to go back in there and make sure everybody can figure it out.
I couldn't figure out how to leave my breakout room to get to the main room, which was, I'm not even sure I know what I did, which I guess
You hit leave and then you just say leave breakout room rather than leave whole meeting. But you did it. So good.
Oof, sorry. Yeah, you texted me. Josh was chatting me. He's like, there's a whole bunch of people in the main room. And I just assumed people would go slowly. I didn't wait. But thank you for catching that.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, it's an update thing. So
and I set a timer on the breakout rooms, but apparently it didn't save. So it's locked into the 40 minutes that we had from our most recent COVES art convening. So I'll just have to pull those people back probably in 2 minutes, 1 minute, 1 or 2 minutes. Just so we have a chance before the end of the hour so it doesn't run over. But good turnout and good presentations, smattering of examples. I'm impressed with the COVES art convening people being here, which is good.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah. I'm going to jump back into the Connecticut Science Center one just in case there are questions, and then I'll be back here in a minute.
Okay.
So we could separate it out by the device that it was done on, but otherwise that data is appearing in the same set. Okay. But we've made a more recent move to a concerted effort to have people actually do it on site rather than a QR code, because as Patty mentioned, for both the staff doing the data collection and for the visitors, it became just kind of an easy out and resulted in little data.
Okay, so before pandemic, when you're collecting physically, were members' scores higher than non-members, or was it kind of even?
I think it was kind of even. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily higher. Members tend to be a little harsher, I think, in general for us, regardless of the pandemic, just because they know what like our good standard is. So just regardless of the pandemic at all, if we're off our game, they know it. So I think they can be like, they're great, but they can be a little bit more critical of us. So.
Yeah, and I think it's for us, it's sort of the opposite. There are things that they seem to be, either they just like us more or they're more tolerant of certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Josh, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Gowell. I'm from the Exploratorium in San Francisco. I was just, Patty, I was intrigued when you said that a lot of people who took the email weren't even the people who came to visited the museum. And I was wondering, how did you know that? And how do their responses differ from people who did come to the museum, if you know that?
Well, it could be a grandma buying it, and they would literally say that in the comment. So they would.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, yep.
So in the comment, they'd say like, well, I didn't go, I just bought the tickets.
Yes.
Yeah. Instead of forwarding the email survey to the people.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So do you just throw that out? I mean, what's the point of even including that in your data set?
That's a good point. I mean, when I run the data, I export it anyways. I don't always just use the widgets. So, I mean, we can isolate those and take them out if we wanted to, but I don't think it's a lot of them. I would say there's probably a handful, but I don't know that it would skew the data either way. So we've left them in there for right now.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I didn't think there was a question on COVES about.
No.
Did you actually go to the museum yourself?
No, it's sort of one of those things you just make an assumption about. So then when we saw it the first time, we were like, wait, what?
Yeah, right. So it sounds like you would not recommend the QR code approach, that it's better, even though people are reluctant to take a tablet, it's probably better to require them to take the tablet from you and just let them see that you cleaned it and then give it to them, kind of thing.
And we put it on stands too, so that the stand can get wiped down, so we did all of the things around it that would make it feel much more, safe,
Wait, say that again. You put it on a stand, so you weren't handing it to them. They just okay.
Originally, we were actually handing them the tablet, and they could sit at a table, or that kind of thing. Where now we had it there, so and then it wasn't traveling. It wasn't like their whole hand was on the tablet, etc.
Yeah. Have you thought about putting it into like a kiosk, or is the stand plenty good enough for like it's not wobbly and they can just use it easily?
Yeah, it's worked so far for us.
Cool. Yeah, we haven't reopened yet. We're hoping to reopen in July. San Francisco put it into effect in a fine print when they said museums could reopen back in October, saying, but no hands-on interactive exhibits, which is like the entire Exploratorium. So we are negotiating with the city to get them to allow us to reopen. But so this is super helpful for us because we haven't even really figured out exactly how we're going to be doing our data collection. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, there's only 5 seconds left before we're going to go to the main session. So for the main room.
We use this for our performance metrics.
We started a weekly floor staff meeting. So I joined just to share COVES data, but it's basically just visitor services representatives, floor staff, security, everyone who's on the floor, exhibit maintenance, just in a meeting to share and brainstorm direct solutions to problems together. And I bring in data when it's available. So yeah, they all were obviously it was much more crowded, and they had even more detail about where specifically it was crowded and where people were having the most issues in the museum so that we could problem solve.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to cut that conversation short. I realize I kind of flubbed the whole breakout room thing, but thank you all for bearing with me and us collectively. We are at the end of our hour. I want to be sensitive to everyone's schedules. Thank you so much. This was a huge turnout. I heard a lot of great conversation. I'm thrilled. I hope the data examples were useful for you all as you think about ways to use COVES, whether you're reopened or planning on reopening. And always feel free to leverage the community of practice to follow up on these presentations or questions and conversations. If you have additional thoughts, we do have the message board on the Aztec COP, and we would love to keep these conversations going. So this has been recorded. We'll post this to our YouTube site, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Some of you tomorrow, some of you next month on our next webinar. So have a great Tuesday, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.